Hello and welcome to the revision video for Human Rights and Social Justice for AQA Religious Studies A. This is part of paper 2, which is the themes paper. Before you start watching the video, there's just a couple of admin points to go through so that you make best use of the video. I'll expect you to have a pen in front of you all the time, and if you see this symbol here, then I want you to start writing something down, and I'll instruct you to write things down, but obviously if you want to make notes throughout the rest of the video, then feel free to do so. Where you see the pause symbol, then pause the video on your device and make sure that you're using that time to make further notes or to practice an exam question. When we do have exam questions, I'll tell you the amount of time that I want you to spend on that exam question. That is the amount of time that you should be spending in your exam. Please try to keep to those times as strictly as possible to give you the best practice possible for that exam question. So, first of all, we'll start with some revision questions on keywords. Obviously, the keywords are very important for you to learn for the exam so that you can access all of the questions that you might be asked. So, on your piece of paper in front of you, I just want you to write down the word that will go with each one of these definitions. First question, these are the basic things that humans should have as they are human. For example, education and shelter. Number 2, making sure everyone is treated fairly. It means fairness in terms of wealth and opportunities in society. Number 3, the right to believe or practice whatever religion one chooses. Number 4, the right to worship, preach and practice one's faith in whatever way one chooses. Number 5, this means fairness. It is to make right and fair a situation that has been unfair. Number 6, to think about someone unfairly just because of who they are, such as their race, age, gender, religion or disability. Number 7, to act on prejudice, treating someone unfairly because of their race, religion, gender or ethnicity. Number 8, treating someone unfairly because of their gender. Number 9, treating someone unfairly because of their race, skin colour or nationality. Number 10, treating someone unfairly because they are attracted to the same sex. Number 11, treating people more favourably because the group they belong to have been badly treated in the past. For example, giving a black person a job over a white person because black people were discriminated against in the past. Number 12, a duty to care for or having control over someone or something. Number 13, an amount of money or investments. Number 14, the condition of being without money, food or other basics needed in life, being poor. Number 15, an organisation that does not work for profit and which usually works to help others, for example, children in need, shelter or Islamic relief. Number 16, the act of treating people unfairly to benefit from their labour or work. 17, being paid a fair wage for the work done. Number 18, when people pay a lot more than what they borrowed because of high interest rates. This leads to poverty or makes it even more difficult for the poor. Number 19, it is the illegal movement of people which involves buying and selling people to force them to work for others or to sexually exploit them. Number 20, giving people the same status, rights and opportunities. That's all of the questions on keywords complete. Now get yourself a different coloured pen or a pencil so that when we go through the answers you can mark which ones you have got right, which ones you have got wrong and which keywords you need to do more revision on. The basic things that humans should have as they are human, for example education and shelter, are human rights. And this is what the whole topic is really about. Making sure everyone is treated fairly, meaning fairness in terms of wealth, opportunities in society. That's social justice. The right to believe or practice whatever religion one chooses is freedom of religion. And the right to worship, preach and practice one's faith in whatever way one chooses is freedom of religious expression. This means fairness. It is to make fair and right a situation that has been unfair. That is justice, and you should recognise justice from previous topics that we've done. To think about someone unfairly just because of who they are, such as their race, age, gender, religion or disability, is prejudice. To act on a prejudice, treating someone unfairly because of their race, religion, gender or ethnicity, is discrimination. Treating someone unfairly because of their gender is sexism. Treating someone unfairly because of their race, skin colour or nationality is racism. Treating someone unfairly because they're attracted to the same sex is homophobia. Treating people more favourably because the group they belong to have been treated badly in the past, for example, giving a black person a job over a white person because black people were discriminated against in the past, is positive discrimination. A duty to care for or having control over something or someone is responsibility. An amount of money or investment is the wealth that a person has. The condition of being without money, food or other basics needed in life is poverty. An organisation that does not work for profit and which usually works to help others is charity. And you've got some examples of charity there: children in need, shelter and Islamic relief. The act of treating people unfairly to benefit from their labour or work is exploitation. Being paid a fair wage for the work done is fair pay. When people pay a lot more than what they borrowed because of high interest rates, this could lead to poverty, making it even more difficult for the poor, is excessive interest on loans. The illegal movement of people, which involves buying and selling people to force them to work for others or sexually exploit them, is people trafficking or human trafficking. And giving people the same status, rights and opportunities is equality. Throughout the video, we'll go through various different key rules which you'll be able to apply to various different topics, not just this one. The first one of those rules that we're going to look at is love your neighbour. We know that Jesus taught Christians to love everyone and be kind and caring towards everybody, no matter who they are. And this teaching actually comes from the parable of the Good Samaritan, which was a story that Jesus told about treating your enemies with kindness and making sure you treat them with love, no matter what. So, I want you to pause the video in a second and tell me the answer to the question below. How will this belief affect a Christian's attitude to discrimination? So you can use the sentence starter that we've got just there, and I want you to tell me how it affects a Christian's attitude to discrimination. Pause the video now and answer that. The first thing we need to look at is human rights, and the rights of a UK citizen in particular. Human rights are the things that we believe that people should have a right to or should have available to them just because they're human. And in the UK, we've got various different things that we believe everybody should have a right to. Important things could include the right to life, the right to be free from slavery, the right to vote in an election, the right to have a fair trial if you're arrested. All of these things are things that the UK government protect our right to. And you've got a list of various other things that we get protected rights for as well. The first thing I want you to think about is why it's important to respect other people's human rights. Why is it important that we believe that others have human rights? And to do that, you need to think about what makes us equal and why it might be important to protect that equality. Think about religious teachings if you can, and try to write down 3 reasons that would support protecting people's human rights. Pause the video now and have a go at writing down those 3 reasons. 3 possible things you could have talked about are the sanctity of life. So everyone's life is special because God has created it. Therefore, everybody has the right to the same standard of living and the same rights in life. Another one could be that it helps to stop discrimination. It helps to protect people from that. And a teaching that you could link to that would be love your neighbour. If you're protecting people from discrimination, it's a nice thing to do and therefore a loving thing to do, and it follows Jesus' teaching. It creates a sense of unity in society. If you see yourself as being the same as the other people around you, you're more likely to come together as a community. And a teaching that we could use to support that could be the Ummah, that Islamic idea of everybody being equal and together and supporting each other. Finally, it creates a sense of equality. If we think about teachings to support that, we could use St. Paul's teaching of there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for all are equal under Christ. So in doing that, we get a really clear idea of why rights might be important to religious people. Non-religious people may also see rights as being important because many non-religious people see everybody as being absolutely equal. If everybody is equal, then everybody deserves the same rights. And that's why such a high emphasis is put on rights within UK law and within law around the world. One right which many people believe that we're entitled to is religious freedom and expression. Definitions of both those things are available for you on the board now. Within religion, we may be very aware that people wish to display their religious beliefs. This might be just through the way that they act. So we might see people praying or attending particular services or attending particular religious events. Or it might be that they do something more obvious all the time, like wearing something in particular or having a particular symbol of their faith which they carry around with them. Now, this idea of religious expression is something which some people see as being very, very important and other people see as not being very important at all. What I want you to do is, on your piece of paper, just to create a table like the one that we've got on the screen there. On one side, you're going to write down reasons why people should be able to openly express their religious beliefs. On the other side, I want you to write down reasons why people should not be able to openly express their religious beliefs. So here we need to think about why it might be a good thing for people to be able to show what religion they belong to and be able to express those religious beliefs openly. And on the other side, why it might not always be a good thing. Use the key rules and your own ideas to be able to do this. So try to think about religious beliefs that you could apply to these different sides of the argument and try to give me 3 bullet points for each point of view. Pause the video now, and when you've got 3 bullet points, you can press play again. Okay, let's review your tables and see what you've got. On one side of the table, we've got the idea that people should be able to openly express their religious beliefs. Now, there are a few reasons for this. One of them, it's a command for certain believers to dress in a particular way. So, for example, many Muslim women believe that they ought to wear a headscarf because it's been commanded by God to do that in the Quran. Now, this should be respected because for them, it's a part of their faith. And openly showing what faith they belong to means that they're pleasing God. Another reason why people might believe that they should be openly able to express their religious beliefs is that it's showing love to others to allow them to express their beliefs. Jesus said, love your neighbour, and if you're allowing people to do what makes them happy, then that's a loving thing to do. Other reasons you might have included in your table could include other instructions to do religious things like taking Holy Communion, for example. Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. Or it could be that religious people ought to try and convert people to their faith. And sometimes showing your faith in the open is a good way to be able to do that. On the opposite side of the argument, the idea that people should not be able to express their religious beliefs, we've got the idea that it can offend others if people share their religious beliefs. One example of this could be religions who say that homosexuality is wrong. In the Bible it says, give none offence neither to the Jews nor the Gentiles nor to the Church of God. This clearly tells Christians that they shouldn't go around trying to offend people. Another idea is that it can make people feel uncomfortable to communicate with someone because of what religious clothing they wear. Some people feel very uncomfortable speaking to people who wear a veil, perhaps because they can't see their facial expressions, or perhaps just because it doesn't fit with social conventions in the place where they live. Another potential idea that you could use to say that why people should not openly express their religious beliefs could be the idea that actually people don't have a right to try and convert others to their religion. If what they're doing by expressing their religious beliefs is trying to convert others, then others actually have the right to not be exposed to that and not have their own religious beliefs or lack of religious beliefs challenged by religious people. Next, we need to talk about prejudice and discrimination. And it's very important that we understand the difference between these two terms. Prejudice, we defined earlier on, is thinking about somebody negatively just because of their age, colour, race, gender, religion, or disability. Now, the key thing to think about here is the fact that we're just talking about the thought process that somebody goes through. When we talk about prejudice, it's easier to think about it as being a prejudgment of what you think of somebody. So based on somebody's gender, race, or religion, you might make your mind up about the way that a particular person is. Discrimination is slightly different to prejudice, although prejudice is required for discrimination. Discrimination is when these prejudice ideas are actually put into action. So discrimination is actually treating people unfairly just because of their colour, race, gender, religion, age, disability, or a lifestyle. If we have a look at the cartoon as an example, we could see that the man in the picture has created a prejudice idea about women. However, the fact that he's actually not giving someone a job because of the fact that they are a woman means that he's showing discrimination. If all that he held was a prejudice, then he wouldn't be discriminating at that point. But because he fails to give the job to that person, he shows discrimination. Write down 2 bullet points in your notes to explain the difference between those 2 key words. Just to check that you understand that difference, I want you to answer these 2 questions that we have on the screen. The first is 2 differences between prejudice and discrimination. Try to explain how the 2 are different and what you're doing in one that you might not be doing in the other. The second question is your own opinion. I want you to tell me which one you think is worse and why. You don't need to write a huge amount to answer this question, but you do need to make sure that you're explaining your opinion. Make some notes to answer the question and pause the video now. Here are some possible answers to the 2 questions that you've just answered. If you get a different coloured pen or a pencil to add to the answers that you've got, then it'll make sure that if you're asked a question something along these lines in the exam, you've got plenty of things to talk about. First of all, we could talk about the fact that prejudice is just in the mind, whereas discrimination is outside of the body. Discrimination uses actions, so it's actually visible to others. Prejudice doesn't actually hurt, especially when it's not acted upon, whereas discrimination can definitely cause harm to other people, particularly if it causes physical discrimination against others. Prejudice can only be stopped by engaging in thinking and educating people in order to be able to change their minds, whereas discrimination can be reduced by passing laws and punishing people to stop them actually doing things. It's much harder to change the way that a person thinks than the way that a person acts. So then we move on to the question of which one could be worse. Prejudice is the basis for discrimination. Without prejudiced thinking, discrimination won't happen. So this suggests for us that prejudice is much worse because it's actually the cause of discrimination. On the other hand, we could say prejudice doesn't actually physically harm anyone. If we think things about people, that's not harmful, whereas if we take part in actions that do harm people, then that's much worse. So in this sense, discrimination could be argued is a much worse action. Prejudice can infect a whole society. For example, in Nazi Germany, prejudiced thought infected the whole of society so that it became the norm, and people saw Jewish people and other ethnic minorities as being inferior. Discrimination can be as extreme as taking life, so it must be worse. For example, a boy called Anthony Walker, who was killed in Liverpool a few years ago, was killed because he was black, and that's as a result of discrimination. Discrimination could also be seen to be worse as it's what has a bigger impact on a person's life. If you feel that you haven't got a job because you've been discriminated against, if you've been harmed because you've been discriminated against, or if you've been bullied because you've been discriminated against, that has a much bigger effect than somebody just thinking badly of you. Now that we've looked at the difference between prejudice and discrimination, and the possible harm that they can cause, which might be worse, we actually need to think about why people show prejudice and why people show discrimination towards others. And there are many reasons why people may become prejudiced. We'll go through a few now, and as I do, just write down a subtitle for each one of them and one reason why that leads to prejudice or discrimination. The first one is our parents. Our parents are the people we're closest to and the people who probably love us the most in the world. If they tell us a particular prejudiced thought or encourage us to discriminate against a particular person, we're likely to do it because we trust their judgment. They teach us all sorts of other things in life, and therefore if they tell us to be prejudiced towards a particular group or a particular person, then it makes sense for us to follow them in that sense as well. It's very difficult to try to combat the influence of parents, as people trust their parents and know that they want what's best for them. Another cause of prejudice could be the media. Again, we've got the issue of trust. If people generally read the newspaper or watch the news or listen to the news and everything that they hear on it is true, when newspapers or news channels give out information that could cause people to show prejudice, then people are likely to trust that as well. And because it comes from a trusted source, people use that as evidence to justify their prejudiced thoughts. A third thing is ignorance. A lot of the time, prejudiced thoughts come from generalisations about groups of people. Here we have an example of immigrants being blamed for absolutely everything. Generally speaking, that's because people don't know what the causes of particular problems in society are, and it's easier to blame a particular group rather than actually find out what the real cause is. Next, we've got fear due to a bad experience. Here we've got the example of somebody being mugged on the street. If you're mugged by somebody from a particular group, and it's a group that you have very little experience of in the rest of your life, it's likely that you project onto the whole of that group the same characteristics as the person who mugged you, and therefore build up prejudiced ideas about what that group of people are like. The final thing that we've got is religion. And there are some religious teachings which some people interpret to mean that they should show prejudice or discrimination to particular groups of people. Now, this is because they believe that God has told them that those particular people are inferior or shouldn't be listened to. And we'll look at some religious teachings later on that might encourage people to show that sort of prejudice or discrimination. As well as knowing the causes of prejudice, you also need to know the different types of prejudice that you might experience or that you might see around the world. On the screen are 6 different pictures that represent different types of prejudice. On your pieces of paper, I want you to create a mind map of the 6 different types of prejudice and discrimination that you can see on the screen displayed in the pictures. Pause the video to do this, and I'll go through each one of them in turn afterwards. That should have been enough time for you to be able to figure out which types of prejudice we're trying to show here. The first one over here, where we're talking about men being smarter than women, or women not being politicians because they can't handle the pressure, is obviously discrimination or prejudice towards women. And we call that sexism. If you didn't get that, make sure that you're writing it down onto your mind map. The next one that we have up here, we've got 2 different coloured eggs looking angrily at one other coloured egg. Now this is racism because we're looking at prejudice based on the colour of that particular thing. Over here, we've got a poster that tells us that seniors should not apply. Seniors are referring to older people, and so discrimination against people because of their age is ageism. Here, we've got a picture which shows a disabled person unable to get across to the same sort of area as lots of able-bodied people. And we call that disability discrimination. If people can't get into shops or into office buildings because they're in a wheelchair or because of some other disability, that's disability discrimination. Here we have Muslims specifically being targeted in terms of who's allowed to park where. This is what we call religious prejudice. It's when people treat other people differently because of the religion that they belong to. And finally, down at the bottom, we've got a picture of a badge that says God created Adam and Eve and not Adam and Steve. This is clearly an attack on people who are attracted to others of the same sex, and we call this homophobia. It's time for our first keywords test. Write down the definition of exploitation. Exploitation. Exploitation is the act of treating people unfairly to benefit from their labour or work. The next thing that you need to know about are the effects of prejudice. So what effect can prejudice have on individuals and on society as a whole? As I go through these three different things, I want you to make bullet points on each one, explaining what each one is. The first effect we need to talk about is a very serious one indeed, and one which we've got lots of examples of in history. That is genocide. And that is when a large group of people are killed because of prejudice. Hitler did this in the Holocaust because of his prejudice against Jewish people. And around 12 million people were killed during the Holocaust through prejudice. The next thing is segregation. Now this is when people are separated from others because of prejudice. The example that you can see in the picture below is a sign taken from South Africa, where apartheid was a form of segregation that lasted for decades in that country. Black people and white people were not allowed to live and work in the same areas, and black people were treated much worse than white people in the laws in the country. A third effect of prejudice could be hate crimes. Again, this is very serious because it involves people being killed or injured due to prejudice. The example in the picture that you can see above is one of Anthony Walker, an 18-year-old who was killed in Liverpool because of the colour of his skin. So there are three effects of prejudice there that you could refer to in your exams using examples for each one. Having already given you three things that could be the effects of prejudice, I want you to try to think of more effects of prejudice. What else might prejudice lead to within society? And you can think as generally or as specifically as you like with this. If you can, try to give examples with each one of the bullet points that you write down as an effect of prejudice, just like we did on the previous slide. Try to think of at least three more effects of prejudice. Pause the video now and play it again once you've thought of three. So here are some alternative ideas that you might have had in terms of the effects of prejudice. We could refer to war on a large scale as being an effect of prejudice that people might have. We could also refer to the feelings that a person might have if they are a victim of prejudice. Prejudice can lead to people feeling worthless, depressed, and it can even lead to people taking their own lives because they feel suicidal. Terrorism is another effect of prejudice. Terrorists sometimes cite the reason for their terrorism as being the discrimination that they feel that their people have felt in their country or from other countries. Another effect of prejudice could be discrimination. So becoming sexist, racist or ageist is actually an effect of prejudice. The way that somebody thinks has led to them carrying out sexist, racist or ageist actions. And finally, a potential effect of prejudice is actually positive discrimination. This is when people are treated more favourably because of prejudice or discrimination that has been against them in the past. It's time for another one of our key rules, and this is another one from Christianity. This one is that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, and it's a teaching from St. Paul. This means that every person is important and valuable because they have a part of God within them. Now, what I want you to do is refer to one of the effects of prejudice and think about how this teaching shows a Christian that they should never be prejudiced. Use the sentence starter that you've got up on the board and pause the video now to complete that sentence. What we need to look at next is what has been done to stop prejudice and discrimination. We know that this is an issue, and we know that most people would not agree with showing prejudice or discrimination to any groups of people because they believe that everybody has equal rights within society. This has led to lots of people doing things about the fact that we see prejudice and discrimination within society. I want you to pause the video and brainstorm three different ideas as to what you know that people have done to stop prejudice, discrimination, and in particular racism in society. Okay, you should have had enough time to brainstorm the ideas that you could have had. I'm now going to go through a few of the things that have happened, and if you're missing any of them, make sure that you're adding them to your brainstorm. The first thing we could talk about is making sure that segregation is illegal under the law. So laws have been changed in different places in order to ensure that people of different skin colours, different religions, are not discriminated against through the law. This leads to people of different cultures, races and backgrounds being able to mix in order to learn about each other and getting rid of that cause of prejudice that was ignorance, not knowing about groups of other people. A second thing that has been done is to ensure that schools teach about prejudice and discrimination so that people know that it is wrong. Again, we're focusing on that idea of ignorance. We're trying to combat the fact that if people are ignorant towards others, they're more likely to show prejudice towards them. And that in later life is more likely to lead to discrimination. So by dealing with it in schools as early as possible, we should be getting rid of those problems. The next thing that we could talk about is creating new laws that deal with prejudice. Creating new laws such as the Race Relations Act in 1976 made it illegal to refuse to hire people based on the colour of their skin. And this has been updated in 2010 with the Equality Act. Those new laws mean that even though you might not be getting rid of people's prejudices, you're making it much more difficult for people to discriminate against others, particularly in terms of racism. The final thing that we can talk about is also related to the law. If people don't think that they're being treated fairly, they can take others to court and to employment tribunals. The law will protect people against prejudice and will prosecute people if they're found guilty of showing prejudice or discrimination towards others. Another thing that we need to look at in terms of prejudice and discrimination is the religious position on some of those forms of prejudice. Now, many people would argue that religions actually allow sexism, and it's important for us to understand why it is that people might think that is the case, and why it is that many people would say it's absolutely not the case. On your pieces of paper, I want you to write down 2 or 3 bullet points that tell me why religions are maybe sexist, and 2 or 3 bullet points that tell me why religions are not sexist. I'll take you through each one and think about the ones that you would remember the best and ones that you think are the most important. So we'll start off with reasons why people might think that religions are sexist. The first of these is that big religions like Roman Catholicism don't actually allow female priests, and Muslims don't allow female imams. The idea that women can't be leaders in either of these religions is problematic in today's society, where so much of employment law is centred around equality and ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity. It makes these two religions look very outdated in terms of their attitudes towards the different sexes. Another reason why people may say that religions are sexist is that in the Quran it says that both husbands and wives have equal rights, but in some situations men have the final say. Many people refer to the first part of this teaching to say that actually Islam is not sexist at all. Husbands and wives have equal rights. But the caveat placed on that in some situations men should have the final say, seems to put men at a more advantageous position and seems to suggest that actually men and women are not equal at all. In Christianity, in the Bible, St. Paul said, "Wives, obey your husbands as you obey your Lord." In some situations, this is translated as "submit to your husbands as you submit to your Lord." This appears to put men on an equal footing to God for women, and that's obviously very problematic in terms of being able to say that men and women should be treated equally. Also in the Bible, it says that women should remain silent in churches. They are not allowed to speak. This is one of the reasons given by the Roman Catholic Church for not allowing women to be priests. And it does seem to suggest that in church, a woman's view is not valuable. On the other hand, we could also say that religions are certainly not sexist. For example, some Christian denominations have recently begun to allow women to be priests or ministers. For example, the Church of England and the Methodist Church for a long time has allowed women to be ministers. This does seem to show that as the church evolves, they are accepting more equal rights for women, and maybe ignoring some of the old-fashioned ideas that they've held in the past. As well as this, Muhammad, peace be upon him, said a mother is 3 times more important than the father, giving women a lot of status in Islam. People should treat their mothers very kindly, and the importance put on them over men can be seen from the teachings that the Prophet gave about them. Another one of these teachings is the fact that Muhammad, peace be upon him, said the best of you are those who are best to their wives. He emphasises the fact that men need to be kind to women and ensure that they don't treat them badly. We could argue that sexism would be treating women badly, and therefore Muhammad directly teaches against it. Finally, Another Christian teaching is that in the Bible it says, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ. This is a particularly good teaching to show equality, not least of all because it specifically mentions that you are neither male nor female. St. Paul tells Christians that if they believe in Jesus, everybody is absolutely equal, regardless of where they've come from or what gender they are. And lots of Christians would refer to this to be able to say that women deserve as much right in society as men. It's time for our first exam question. This is a 5-mark exam question, so we need to be able to refer to religious teachings in our answer. You must give 2 different reasons for the views that you give. If you can, you need to back them up with religious views, and you must explain the quotations that you're referring to. Use the information that we got from the previous task in order to help you out with this. You have 5 minutes to do this exam question, and you need to write using PEE skills. That means you need to give a point, some evidence, which should be a quotation, and then you need to explain that evidence in relation to the status of women in society. That means how they're treated in society. Give yourself 5 minutes to do this. Pause the video now. Okay, let's see how you did. Here's a potential answer that you could have given. I'll take you through the successes in this answer. You need to make sure that you're writing using the same structure and that you've included religious teachings which you've explained clearly in your own answer. Christians think that women should not have much of a say in society because they are told to be silent. In the Bible it says, women should remain silent in churches. They are not allowed to speak. This means that they should not have a say in society because if they don't have a say in church, their views cannot be valued in society. Muslims think that women have high status in society, but as the role of a mother. Muhammad, peace be upon him, said the mother is 3 times more important than the father. This proves how women are far more valued than men when it comes to being a parent, so that is how they can be seen to be important in society. In both of these questions, you can see that we're referring back to the important part of the question, their value in society. In both answers as well, you can see that we make a simple point. There's then some evidence. In one case, it's a direct quotation, whereas in the other, it's just an example. And then the evidence is explained at the end. You must ensure that the 2 points that you've given include all 3 of these things. They need to have a point, some evidence, an explanation of that evidence, and in that explanation, you need to have linked back to the value of women in society. If you haven't done any of these things, try to correct your answer now so that it does. Next, we have another one of our key rules, and this one is the golden rule. This is both a Christian and Islamic teaching, and it basically just says, treat others the way that you would like to be treated. This is a really important rule to remember and one that can be used across lots of different topics. On your paper, what I would like you to do is to think about the question of how this shows that discriminating against homosexuals is wrong. Think about how you would want to be treated and how you're treating other people in your answer, and use the sentence starter on the board to answer that question. This teaching shows that discriminating against homosexuals is wrong because... The next thing that we need to know about is positive discrimination. As I talk you through this, I want you to write down 2 bullet points that will give you an idea of what positive discrimination is and an example of positive discrimination. We've already actually had a definition of positive discrimination earlier on in the slides. This is treating people more favourably because the group they belong to have been badly treated in the past. An example of this would be giving a black person a job over a white person because black people were discriminated against in the past. Over the last 10 years, a more specific example of this has been the police and fire service. They've advertised specifically in minority groups so that they get applications from people from minority areas. This would give people from those groups an advantage as they're often the victims of discrimination and in particular in those 2 services have not been representative of the population as a whole. Now that we know what positive discrimination is, we need to think about whether it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I want you to make a table in your book. On one side of it, it should say positive discrimination is right, and on the other, positive discrimination is wrong. Again, I want you to use your key rules and information about positive discrimination to try and figure out whether you think that positive discrimination is right or wrong. Try to get 3 bullet points on each side of the table and try to attach teachings to as many of them as possible. Pause the video now and get 3 bullet points on either side of the table. Okay, it's time to review what you've got. Add any ideas that you haven't got or ones that you think are particularly good. The first of the ideas that we need to talk to is about why positive discrimination could be seen as a good thing. Jesus taught people to love your neighbour, and it's kind and caring to treat people better so that they can have the same chances as others now. And this is an argument that many people would give for the existence of positive discrimination in society. It's a loving thing to do. People could also see it as a way of giving justice to those treated badly in the past. It's redressing the balance and making sure that people are treated fairly now. The Quran supports this by saying, "Be just as it is close to righteousness." As well as these 2 ideas, we could also say that it allows people who've had limited rights in the past to have a better life now. This is looking after others, and it helps them to feel part of a community. Muslims believe that everyone is one ummah, one community, and Muhammad described it as a single body. If we're looking after this community and making people feel more united, then it must be a positive thing. On the other side of the argument, we could say that positive discrimination is wrong. The clue's in the title because it is still discrimination. Whilst we're treating one group better because they've been treated badly in the past, it means that we begin to not be fair to the other group. The Quran says Allah loves the fair-minded, and it seems pretty clear to most people that if you're treating one group better, then somebody must suffer because of that. It's not fair. As well as this, everybody should be treated equally regardless of their past. Muhammad said all people are equal as the teeth on a comb. And if you take that into account with positive discrimination, then really we're going against that teaching. Alongside these 2, we could use the key rule of the sanctity of life. God has created all life, not just some people's lives, and that should mean that everybody's life is just as sacred as everybody else's. By showing positive discrimination, we're still showing discrimination towards particular groups, and that goes against that idea that everybody's life is just as special as others. It's time for another keywords test. On your paper, write down the definition of justice. Justice means fairness. It is to make right and fair a situation that has been unfair. The next thing that we need to look at are the views within religion on the status and treatment of homosexuality and homosexuals. Homosexuals are people who are attracted to people of the same sex. And both religions, Islam and Christianity, have varying views on how homosexuals should be viewed and treated. One major thing to bear in mind here is that although there are views in both religions that could be seen to condemn homosexuality, no religion allows discrimination against people because of homosexuality. So although religious people in some cases may disagree with it, there is nothing to say within religion that you should be allowed to discriminate against people because of their sexual preference. As I go through the different views that each religion might hold, I want you to make sure that you're writing down the teaching that we give and what it means in terms of whether that religion would be for or against homosexuality. For each religion, I'll give 2 contrasting views, one which shows that homosexuality is okay and the other which condemns homosexuality. And we'll start off with Islam. The first teaching that we need to look at is the fact that in the Quran it says that the people of Prophet Lut who were committing homosexuality were destroyed by violent storms. Now this seems to suggest that God does not approve of homosexuality to the extent that he is willing to send nature to destroy people who are practicing it. This leads many Muslims to believe that homosexuality is wrong, as it is condemned by Allah in the Quran. In contrast to this, the Quran says Allah loves the fair-minded. This means that Allah loves everybody who treats people fairly, and discriminating against people or treating people differently because they're homosexuals would not be a fair thing to do, and therefore would not be something that pleases Allah. In Christianity, the Bible commands Adam and Eve to go forth and multiply. Often Christians will cite this as an example of something that shows that God only approves of relationships between males and females, as they seem to be natural, and God wants people to have children. Because people in same-sex relationships can't naturally have children, then many Christians would use this as a reason for homosexuality not being approved of by God. In contrast to this, Christians believe that St. Paul has taught, submit to those in authority over you. This means that you should submit to those who are creating the laws in the country that you live in. The UK law allows homosexual couples to get married, and it also gives them the same rights as others. This means that Christians need to respect the law, they need to respect the people who've been put there by God, and they need to make sure that they're treating homosexuals in just the same way as everybody else. Other teachings that you could look at in both Islam and Christianity could be more general teachings on equality, because if you're discriminating against homosexuals or treating them differently because of them being homosexuals, you are not treating them equally. So Muhammad, peace be upon him's teaching of we are all as equal as the teeth on the comb, or St. Paul's teaching of there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for all are one in Jesus Christ, both suggest that homosexuals should be treated in exactly the same way as everybody else, as they're people too. Many Christians and Muslims use this as a general guiding principle for the way that they should treat anybody who is different from the way that they are. And this applies to homosexuals as well as everybody else. The next thing that we need to look at within the topic is the issue of wealth and poverty. And the first thing that we're going to look at within that is the ways that people make money. The first thing that I want you to do is to write down religious people can make money by, and make 5 bullet point notes on ways that religious people may be able to make money. To help you out with this, just think of religious people as being normal people. They can make money in the same way as anybody else. So think of 5 different ways that people may be able to make money. Pause the video now and write down 5 bullet point notes. Here are some possible ideas that you could have had. The first one is probably the most obvious one, and it's earning money from doing a job. Some people are paid huge amounts of money for the job that they do, whilst others are not paid as much. But the main way that most people make money is by doing a job and earning money from it. Another way that people could earn money is through inheritance. This is money that you gain in the death of a relative or friend, and they pass it on to you. Another potential way of making money could be through savings and investments. Lots of people put money to one side, which gains interest, and other people invest money into different businesses or different schemes, which earns them more money. A further way that people could make money is through business and enterprise. Entrepreneurs and business owners make money by selling goods or services to people in the public or in other places. There are other ways in which people might make money, which are often seen as not being as moral as the other ones that we've mentioned so far. The first of these could be gambling. This is when people bet money on the outcomes of things like sporting matches in order to try and make more money from that. The final thing that we could talk about is making money through dishonest means, such as theft or drug dealing. Some people, like thieves and drug dealers, become very wealthy because of their illegal activity and the things that they're selling or stealing from others. Now that you have a good idea of the sorts of things that people might do in order to make money, I want you to answer the question below. Which one of the ways do you think a religious person would not agree with? And I want you to explain why. In your explanation, try to refer to a religious teaching and try to think of the outcome of what's happening in that particular situation. Pause the video now and write your answer. It's time for another one of our key rules. This one is Islamic, and it is the Ummah. This is the belief that all Muslims are part of one brotherhood and one community. This means that they need to look after one another. Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "They are all like one single body. If one part of it hurts, the rest of it aches in pain." My question for you is, what should a Muslim do to help the poor? And how can the Ummah relate to that? We've looked at the reasons why people might be rich. I want you to do the opposite now. Write down on your piece of paper, people are poor because. and try to think of 5 different reasons why people may become poor. Bullet point your answers. Pause the video now and get 5 different things. I'll take you through some different reasons why people might become poor. As I go through them, make sure that you're making notes on each one of them and explaining why it might cause poverty. The first of these is exploitation. Exploitation is when people are paid unfairly and given less than they deserve for the work that they do. This happens a lot of the time in poorer countries, where wealthier countries and big companies exploit the people in that country because of their poverty. People are forced to work for such low pay because they have no option, and they continue to be in poverty. Another reason why people might be poor was one of the reasons that we gave for people being rich, and that is gambling. Although people can make a lot of money from gambling, a lot of people become addicted to gambling and can lose huge amounts on chancing their money on risky bets. Most people who gamble do lose, and if people gamble too much of their money, they lose huge amounts of it. A massive reason why people might become poor is dependency. People can become addicted to drugs or alcohol, and this can affect their ability to work as well as being an expensive habit. If people are no longer able to work and have an expensive habit to feed, then this can lead to poverty very, very quickly. A further cause of poverty could be apathy or laziness. This is basically an attitude that leads to them having no interest in doing the work that would earn them money. Some people just can't be bothered, and some people would rather stay at home and have no job. A further reason for poverty is corruption. This happens in some countries where leaders take money for themselves rather than distributing it amongst the people who really need it. Corruption can be a huge problem because it means that money given to countries or money that countries earn doesn't get distributed fairly and can lead to massive disparities in the wealth of countries. Finally, a reason for being poor could be a lack of education. Education is a tool which allows people to gain good jobs and gain better money. If you lack education, you're less likely to get a good job and therefore less likely to be able to earn a lot of money. This can lead to poverty. Time for another keywords test. Define the word human rights. Human rights are the basic things that people should have because they are human. For example, education and shelter. It's now time for another religious teaching. This one is a Christian teaching from the Bible, and it says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. This means that if you get too attached to wealth, you may start committing sins and lose your love and closeness to God. I want you to use this teaching to explain a Christian's attitude towards being rich. Use the sentence starter, Christians think that being rich is a good or bad thing because. Try to write using a PEE paragraph and make reference to the teaching above. Pause the video now in order to answer the question. The next thing that you need to know about is a word that we have looked at a couple of times, and that word is exploitation. The poor are often referred to as a group of people who are exploited, in particular in terms of the amount that they might get paid. Fair pay means being paid a fair wage for the work done, and many poor people, especially in poorer countries, are paid unfair wages. They're paid less than what the work is worth. As we go through this, I want you to make 5 bullet points on saying why fair pay should be used and why fair pay maybe should not be used. Listen carefully and write down ideas for both sides of the argument. The first thing we can say about why fair pay is good is what Muslims and Christians teach their believers. Both religions teach their believers to be fair. In the Quran it says Allah loves the fair-minded. And Christians believe that God is fair and just, and so therefore they should be fair and just too. This would suggest that fair pay is the right way forward because you're treating other people in a fair way. Secondly, fair pay means that people have a good amount of money to look after themselves and their family. It's being kind to people to pay them fairly. Jesus said to love your neighbour, and this kindness shown is showing love towards other people. As well as this, one of the names of Allah in the Quran is the compassionate one. And Muslims may want to show compassion towards others by paying them a fair amount of money to make sure that they can look after themselves and their family. Alongside this, the UK law has created laws such as the Equality Act, which ensures that people are treated equally and fairly. Christians have a duty to follow the law, when in the Bible it says, "Submit to those in authority over you," as they are believed to have been put there by God. If Christians follow the law, they should support fair pay laws, such as the minimum wage or the living wage. On the other side of the argument, we could say that fair pay is not a good thing. Businesses are all about making money, and if that means paying workers less, and they're happy to accept a job with low pay, then there shouldn't really be anything wrong with it. As well as this, fair pay may mean that some people would not get excessive salaries. People would not get paid as much as they deserve. People like footballers who've worked very hard to get into the position that they're in may deserve the money that they get for being in that position. The Bible teaches that you reap what you sow, so you get what you deserve for whatever you're doing. And if that happens to be an unfairly high wage, then so be it. As well as being exploited through their pay, poor people are also exploited through the interest that they have to pay on loans. This is referred to as excessive interest, because it's too much. Make 4 bullet point notes to explain what excessive interest on loans is, as I take you through it. Those who are poor often have to take out loans, that's borrowing money, to pay for what they need. Loan companies take advantage of the desperate situation that many poor people are in by offering easy money, but the rate to pay back the interest can have hundreds or even thousands % of interest on it. This means that people end up paying back 10 or more times what they borrowed. For Muslims, this is an issue because they're forbidden to deal with interest, whether taking or giving it. In the Quran it says, "Give up interest, and if you do not, then take notice of war from Allah and His Messenger." Muslims should not borrow or lend with interest, but it's very, very difficult in today's society if you're living in poverty and have no choice but to borrow from a bank, a credit card or a loan company. Some people may even argue that excessive interest on loans should be allowed. It helps people to get money quickly to buy the things that they need, and that is being kind and caring towards them. People could use the teaching of love your neighbour to say that actually loan companies are being quite kind to people in lending them money when they're in difficult situations. If people can't pay back the money that they've borrowed, they shouldn't have taken it out in the first place. Loan companies may argue that people only borrow money if they know that they can pay back the money, and everyone knows that borrowing money that they can't pay back will have consequences. If you're a responsible adult, it's your fault if you can't manage to pay it back. Time for another keywords test. The keyword is social justice. Social justice is making sure that everyone is treated fairly. It means fairness in terms of wealth and opportunities in society. A third way that poor people may be exploited is through people trafficking. Make 3 bullet point notes on the information that I go through with you now. People trafficking is a really, really important issue that you need to know about for your exam. But remember that you can generalise in terms of the bad things that happen to people through people trafficking in order to apply religious teachings to them successfully. People trafficking usually occurs with people from poor and war-torn countries who are desperate for the chance to have a better life. Sometimes criminals, known as traffickers, take advantage of this idea and promise them a better life elsewhere, but instead smuggle them to another country to sell them to work as slaves or as prostitutes. This often means that the people who are being trafficked have paid huge amounts of money to the criminals, who are then being paid again by the people that they sell them to. Some people are trafficked in order to work for rich families for very little. This is basically exactly the same as slavery. They think that they'll be able to send money home to their families, but actually they're being sold into slavery. Some people don't even want to leave their own country, but are kidnapped by those criminals and forced to work for others. I want you to think about what we've just written down about people trafficking and what we've learnt about it. And I want you to write down 3 religious teachings that we could apply to why religious people would think that people trafficking is wrong. To help you out, Think about human rights and why religious people think that everybody deserves equal rights. What does people trafficking do to that? Think about fairness and why religious people believe that we should be fair. Think about whether it's a kind thing to do, and think about whether it's legal. This should give you some ideas as to the religious teachings that you could use in order to answer the question. Pause the video now and give 3 different religious points that would be against people trafficking. It's time for another religious teaching, and this is a Christian one. Jesus said to a rich man, "Go and sell your possessions and give them to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven." This means that you should go and help the poor as it pleases God. In return, God will reward you greatly in heaven. Use this teaching to explain a Christian's attitude towards helping the poor. Use the sentence starter, Christians think that they should or should not help the poor because. Write using a PEE paragraph. Pause the video now and answer the question. We've looked at how the poor are exploited and why people might become poor. Now we need to ask the question of who should be responsible for the poor. Before we look into this in a little bit more detail, I want you to bullet point who you think is responsible for the poor, who should be responsible for helping them and looking after them, and try to explain why. Give 3 different bullet points of groups or people who you think should be responsible for the poor. To push yourself, try to think about why some people might think that the poor should not be helped. Try to use a teaching in your answer. Pause the video now and make those notes. Check your answers against the ones that I've got here. These are the groups that may be responsible for helping the poor, but that doesn't mean to say that if you've got different answers, they're incorrect. The first thing that many people would say is responsible for helping the poor is the government. Welfare payments like universal credit, working tax credits and child benefits mean that poorer people can be helped out by the government. People are given money when they don't have a job, called job seekers allowance, which helps them to survive whilst they're searching for a job. It should also encourage people to look for work, because the amount that you get paid in job seekers allowance is much less than the amount that most people would earn in a job. Another group that people might see as being responsible for helping the poor is the community. Now this could include charities or religious organisations. Many charities such as Shelter help homeless people. Many religious organisations see it as their responsibility to help the poor. In Islam, the compulsory pillar of zakah instructs Muslims to give 2.5% of their own wealth in order to help the poor. Another group that people might see as being responsible for helping the poor is the poor person's family themselves. Their parents have brought them into the world, and if they've brought them into the world, they should be responsible for making sure that they can survive in that world. If people are really struggling with money, many people think that it's the family's responsibility to give them the loans and help them out in order to ensure that they're doing okay. Finally, some people may put the responsibility of looking after the poor on God. God is the all-powerful creator, and if he's put us on this earth in the first place, he should be responsible for making sure that we do okay on it. After all, God is referred to as being compassionate in Islam, and Christians believe that God is omnibenevolent. If God is so loving, then God should be able to look after poor people, and he has the power to do so. Time for another one of our key rules. This one's Islamic, and it is the fact that Muhammad said that all people are as equal as the teeth on a comb. This means that no matter what gender, colour, age, religion, or whatever a person is, they are all the same and equal. I'd like to know, please, what this teaching shows about racism. Start your sentence with, "This shows that racism is wrong because." Now it's time to do another exam question. This is a 4-mark exam question, so again, we're going to be looking at PEE skills. The question is, explain 2 contrasting beliefs in contemporary British society about how wealth should be used. In your answer, you should refer to the main religious tradition in Great Britain and one or more other religious traditions. Because in the question it says that you need to refer to the main religious tradition in Great Britain and one or more other religious traditions, it means we have to refer to Christianity as the main religious tradition in Great Britain and Islam, as that's the other religion that we're looking at. The ideas need to be contrasting, so in this case we need to be giving 2 clearly different ways that wealth could be used. This is a 4-mark question, so it's going to take us 4 minutes. Pause the video now and time yourself for 4 minutes to be able to answer that question. Here you can see a potential answer for that question. Have a look at your own and see how well you've done in terms of answering the question and making sure that you've written clearly in PEE paragraphs. Christians think that wealth should be used in whatever way they want because they've worked hard for it, so it's their choice. The Bible says you reap what you sow, so wealth can be used however you want, as they deserve to do what they want with it, as they've reaped it. However, Muslims think that money should be used responsibly to help the poor because helping the poor is a pillar of Islam, zakah. The Quran says establish prayer and give zakah. This means that the poor should be helped in order to please God. Here we can clearly see that we've written using a PEE structure. Each one of the paragraphs has a clear point about how money should be used. After this, we have religious teachings which support the reasons given. Here we've got a quotation from the Bible, you reap what you sow, and down here we've got establish prayer and give zakah. Finally, we have a clear explanation for each one of those religious teachings that shows us what they mean. The key thing to remember here is that we've got contrasting views. The Christian view is saying that we can do whatever we want with the money that we've got, whereas the Islamic view says that we need to give the money away and ensure that we're helping other people. In terms of a contrast, that's perfect. On the one hand, we're saying that we deserve to keep the money and do whatever we want with it. On the other hand, we're saying we have to give the money away and we've got a responsibility to do that. Make sure that your answer contrasts and that you've used those PEE paragraphs in order to answer the question. Time for another keywords test. Write down the definition for freedom of religion. Freedom of religion is the right to believe or practice whatever religion one chooses. Next, we have another one of our key rules. Muslims believe that Allah is compassionate. One of his names is Ar-Rahman. This means that Allah is kind and loving, so Muslims should also try to be kind and loving to one another. I want you to use this key rule to explain what this teaches Muslims about why they should give to charity. Answer that question by starting with the sentence, this shows that Muslims should give to charity because. Pause the video now and answer that question. One of the groups that we said was responsible for the poor could be charitable organisations that help the poor. There are many religious charities that might help the poor, like Islamic Relief and Christian Aid. As I go through these different points, write down 4 different bullet points that give you some details about the ways that charities may help the poor. Some charities advertise their work through television adverts, posters and billboards so that people are persuaded to donate money to help the poor. You may have seen some of these adverts around town or on your television at home, and they're often quite persuasive in terms of appealing to people's emotions and their empathy to encourage people to give money to the poor. Long-term aid, such as building homes and roads in foreign countries and helping people to get the skills and education that they need to get a job, can be ways that charities help the poor. Many charities, such as Children in Need, focus on the skills and education that people might need in order to come out of poverty themselves. Giving emergency aid at the time of crisis or disaster is also another way that charities may help the poor. People may be given shelter after an earthquake or medical supplies during a war. This can ensure that poor people living in places that are affected by disasters don't fall deeper into poverty and have their lives being put at risk because they can't afford the supplies that they need to survive. Running fundraising events such as Islamic Relief selling cakes for Syria so that people buy items where the money is raised, or Comic Relief selling red noses can often help poor people. Thinking about the work that charities do in order to help the poor, I want you to make a table. And on that table, on one side, I want you to think about reasons why people would think it's a good thing to give to charities. On the other side, reasons why people should maybe not give to charities. Try to give 3 bullet points for each view. Think about the key rules and the other teachings that we've learnt so far to help you out, and try to apply religious teachings to each one of the ideas that you give. Pause the video now and complete the table. Time to review your ideas. If you hear anything that you haven't got down, make sure you're adding to your table the ideas that you don't have. So first of all, we'll look at some reasons why people should give to charities. In Islam, Muhammad said, "He who eats whilst his brother goes hungry is not one of us." To be part of the Ummah, a Muslim person needs to help people in need, like those who are poor, and this could definitely encourage Muslims to give to charity. In the Quran as well, it says, if you save one life, it's as if you saved all of mankind. There is no doubt that helping the poor saves lives. If you imagine people who are in poverty, who are going hungry, then we can save people from starving by donating money in order for them to be able to eat. This could be seen as being like saving everyone in the eyes of God. Alongside this, we could use teachings like treat other people the way that you want to be treated and love your neighbour. Both of these teachings suggest that if you were in poverty, you would want people to give to charity in order that you be helped. And obviously, giving to charity is a loving thing to do, and therefore following the teachings of Jesus. On the other hand, we could look at reasons why people maybe would not want to give to charities. Many people may argue that the poor need to help themselves, especially if the reason for their poverty is something that they've brought on themselves. The Bible says you reap what you sow, and if people have put themselves into poverty through addiction or through being lazy and not wanting to work, then many people may argue that they don't deserve your help. Religious charities might have their own purpose, and that might be to convert people to the faith and educate them about their religion. Many people may say that they may not be allowed to do this, as people who are vulnerable can easily be affected when they're desperate. They don't think it's fair that religious charities put a caveat on helping them. The last thing that we need to look at in order to make sure that we're as fully prepared for our exam as possible is specific religious teachings relating to the topic. As we go through, make sure that you're writing down at least 3 Islamic and 3 Christian teachings, as well as their meaning, that tell you about the topic so far. Write down the ones that you're most likely to remember in your exam. Listen carefully to the teaching and to the explanation. In the Quran it says, "Be just, for it's the closest thing to righteousness." This means that a person is on the right path to heaven if they're fair to others and ensure that others are fair. You could apply this teaching to both the idea of the way that the poor should be treated and the way that other people should be treated in terms of prejudice and discrimination. Fairness or justice applies to both of those topics. Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "He who eats and drinks whilst his brother goes hungry is not one of us." This means that a person must worry about the poor and needy and help them, as if they don't, it is as if they're not a Muslim. The next teaching is, richness does not lie in worldly goods, but true richness is in richness of the soul. This is another hadith, so it comes from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. This means that Muslims should focus on becoming a better Muslim and not worry about making money and becoming rich. Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Riches are sweet, a source of blessing to those who earn them correctly." That means in a halal way. This means that wealth is a blessing from God as long as it is earned in a way that is not sinful. It may mean that Muslims don't want to go out and earn lots and lots of money if it means that they're exploiting others or gambling in order to get it. And finally, another hadith says, "No one has eaten better food than what he can earn by the work of his own hands." This means that Muslims should not rely or depend on others to get their wealth, but work hard for it themselves. Pause the video and write down the 3 teachings and the meaning of those teachings that you think you're most likely to remember for your exam. Next, we have the Christian teachings on the topic. Again, write down 3 Christian teachings that you think that you'll remember for your exam. Jesus said to a rich man, "Go and sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and then come and follow me." This means that people should give to the poor because God will reward them greatly in heaven. Jesus targets the rich in this teaching and tells them that they need to be prepared to give up absolutely everything in order to follow Jesus and prioritise God. Jesus said in the parable of the sheep and the goats that the sheep will go to heaven because they fed the poor, gave water to the thirsty, but the goats did not, so they will go to hell. If you want to remember a specific quotation for this, you could write down, "I was hungry and you fed me." This means that if a person wants to go to heaven, it is not just enough to believe in Jesus, but they also need to help the poor as well, or they might go to hell like the goats in the story. Jesus puts a real emphasis on making sure that you help other people out. It's not just about the beliefs that you have, it's about what you do with those beliefs. Jesus also said that it would be harder for a rich man to get into heaven than it would be for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. The eye of the needle is the small hole at the top of a needle. This means that by being rich, a person may become greedy and distracted from worshipping God, so it may stop them from getting into heaven. Jesus is recognizing that those distractions may become more when you are rich, and therefore it makes it much more difficult to get into heaven because of all the distractions that you have away from God. In the Bible it says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ." This means that in the eyes of Jesus, everyone is exactly the same and equal, no matter who they are, for example, male, black, Greek, or old. This means that people should be treated equally all of the time, and this would please Jesus. Finally, for our Christian teachings, we've got in the Bible it says, "The love of money is the root of all evil." This means that the desire for money can lead to sins such as stealing money or making money in the wrong way, like drug dealing. It seems pretty clear that a lot of the bad things that people do in the world are because they want to make money from it. And the Bible teaches that that is not a good thing. Pause the video now and write down the 3 teachings that you think you're most likely to remember. Now it's time for our final exam question. This is a 12-mark exam question, so we need to be looking at Peel paragraphs, and it will be an evaluation question. The statement that we're looking at is there will never be a socially just society. Now, an important thing to think about in this question is what it means by a socially just society. We know that social justice is treating people fairly throughout society. So the question is arguing that people will never be treated fairly throughout society. As I mentioned before, we need to think about Peel paragraphs in our answer. And if we can add the Peel plus to our answers, then that will increase the sophistication that we're giving to the examiner. We need to give religious teachings to support all of our points, and we need to give both sides of the argument. We must ensure that we're answering the question, so we must ensure that we're referring back to the idea of a socially just society by linking each one of the points that we make back to that question. Give yourself 15 minutes to do this answer and aim to write 2 Peel plus paragraphs and 2 Peel paragraphs as well as a conclusion to answer the question. Pause the video now and allow yourself 15 minutes to answer it. Let's have a look at what you could have got. Check your answer against this in terms of the structure that you're giving and the ideas that you're giving as well. What you need to make sure that you're doing is that your answer makes as much sense as possible. If it doesn't clearly answer the question, then you're not getting the marks that you deserve for it, and you need to make sure that you're correcting it so that it is answering that question. There will never be a socially just society. So, here's the answer. The most obvious argument is to agree with the statement because despite efforts, poverty still exists and there's definitely injustice. For example, Jesus explained in the parable of the sheep and the goats that the sheep receive eternal reward as they helped others, whilst the goats were sent to eternal doom as they failed to help others like the poor. This illustrates the importance of helping the poor, which is why charities like Christian Aid exist. This idea of helping others is further emphasised in Islam through the pillar of zakah. In the Quran, it commands Muslims to establish prayer and give zakah. This demonstrates that Muslims are obliged to help others by giving 2.5 of their savings to the poor. Therefore, there will never be a socially just society, as despite clear efforts by religious people to help the poor through zakah and charity work that has been happening for centuries, there is still a huge amount of poverty in the world. Clearly see that in my model answer, I've only given 2 reasons for the view. Both of those reasons, however, are Peel plus paragraphs, so this answer will be worth about 8 out of 12 marks. Now, the reason why it's worth so many marks for just giving 2 arguments is the sophistication of language in the answer and the number of reasons we've given for each one of the views that we've got. We can see that we're following that Peel plus structure very clearly here. We've got our point, in that we're saying whether we agree or disagree with the statement initially. Then we've got the reason why we would agree or disagree with it. And then the two examples that we're giving both tell us why Christians and Muslims should be trying to show justice or trying to show fairness and equality towards other people. Our link at the end clearly comes back to the idea of a socially just society. We use the word socially just society, and then we explain the views that we've given in the argument previously. Nevertheless, one may disagree and believe that the only reason that charity work and zakah is not as effective is because everyone does not engage in it. If everyone had religious morals guiding them, there would be a socially just society. In the Quran it says that Allah loves the fair-minded. This means that He is pleased when people show fairness and create a fairness in society. Similarly, the Bible says, "For I, the Lord, love justice," which also shows how God loves it when people are fair. Therefore, there can be a socially just society where there is no unfair issues like discrimination or poverty, because if all people followed the Quran and the Bible, they would be just in order to please God and behave in the way that He wants them to behave so that they can enter paradise. Now, thinking about the answer to the question, same structure, and the key thing that we're looking at here is sophistication of language. Again, we've got two different teachings that support our answer, but what I really like about this paragraph is the fact that we've got a reference back to the first paragraph in terms of the way that we start this one. Although we're disagreeing with the argument, we've got a clear reference back to what we were talking about before. Again, we've got a very clear link at the end back to the statement, and we're talking about a just society or social justice, again, that makes it very clear that we're answering the question. For you to get full marks in this question, you'd need to have two paragraphs that look something like this, and some additional ideas that were maybe a little bit more simply put. So if you could only get one piece of evidence, for example, love your neighbour, or treat others the way that you want to be treated, then those two Peel paragraphs on their own would be worth a further 2 marks each, reaching you up to 12 marks. What you have to remember as well is that you should be giving a conclusion, and your conclusion just needs to say what overall you think. Talk about the arguments that you've already given and weigh up which ones are the most convincing. You can give reasons like the number of times that things are mentioned in the Bible or the Quran, or which ones you feel intuitively help people out more and the society that you would want to live in. Hopefully that's helped you out in terms of answering your 12-mark questions, and hopefully it's helped you out in terms of looking at this topic of human rights and social justice. If you need any further guidance with it, then make sure that you're re-watching the video, in particular stopping at points that you struggled with and listening to the explanations for each one of the things.